Hi, welcome, and thank you for participating. Please make sure that your volume's turned up so you can hear each portion of the module. Also, it would be great if you had a piece of scrap paper and pencil just to kind of help you work through some of the activities that we'll be doing. This module is going to explore the experience of racist and sexist prejudice. One reason this is important is because people of color and women are two groups in our society that experience a great deal of oppression. Maybe you aren't an ethnic minority, or maybe you don't identify as a woman, but the problem with prejudice is that it affects us all, so let's take a deeper look. Prejudice has been defined as a positive or negative attitude, judgment, or feeling about a person that is generalized from attitudes or beliefs held about the group to which the person belongs. And sometimes we have difficulty taking ownership of the way we act toward other people, and on a deeper level toward ourselves. A lot of that probably centers on our own fears. We don't want to seem racist or sexist, so we don't explore ways in which we might be. Or maybe we think the problem in our world is just so big that we feel overwhelmed with personal responsibility. But we need to explore the process and context of how racism and sexism occur. Not only that, we all need to understand how difficult those types of prejudices are to untangle from our worlds. In some ways, this module will be personal for you, because learning that way is so much more meaningful. Some of the exercises we'll do will ask you to focus inward on yourself and your experiences. The end goal is for you to feel empowered to act in a way that goes along with what you value about the world and the people around you. Don't forget, you'll need a piece of scrap paper and a pen or pencil. On your sheet of paper, complete the following statement. Mary had a little blank. Mary had a little blank. Most people will either think about writing or actually write the word lamb. Let's try another one. On that same sheet of paper, complete the following statement. There is no place like blank. There is no place like blank. Again, most people will either think about writing or actually write the word home. How about this one? On that same sheet of paper, complete this statement. Most black people tend to blank. Now complete this sentence. Women who are not married by the time they are 40 are blank. The words or phrases you chose for these statements may or may not involve some sort of stereotype. If we think about stereotypes in language, we know we use certain words to categorize, label, and evaluate events and people. This can get to the point where our thoughts become automatic, as was the case with Mary had a little lamb, and there's no place like home. Sometimes we hear things so often, we can't get them out of our head. So if what we're saying here is that sometimes language is bad, why don't we just get rid of it? For instance, when we have a thought that we know is politically incorrect or unethical, why don't we just stop thinking that thought? What if someone said women who are not married by 40 are old maids? Well, if I'm a woman, I certainly don't want to think of myself as an old maid, so I want to get rid of that thought. This is a very common sense approach. If something is bad, we need to get rid of it. We gotta throw it out. This is how we often approach thoughts we don't like. But is this really working? We'll do an exercise that captures the difficulty of eliminating and controlling thoughts we don't want, including our stigmatizing thoughts. Let's see if this is the case with another thought. Suppose I tell you I have $1 million. I'm going to tell you some numbers, and if you remember them when I ask you about them later, I'll give you $1 million. Sounds pretty sweet. Okay, are you ready? Here are the numbers. 1, 2, 3. Did you get them? 1, 2, 3? Okay, what are the numbers? Say them out loud to yourself. 1, 2, 3. Okay, do you think you would still remember those if I ran into you in the hallway next week? What about a year from now? You probably would. Okay, now forget what the numbers are. Those aren't the numbers anymore. I don't have $1 million. Not gonna give you $1 million. Okay, what are the numbers? You're probably thinking 1, 2, 3, but I told you to forget them. There is no $1 million. You have no reason to remember that. Don't think about them. What are the numbers? It seems like once something is in our head, we can't erase it. What happened in these exercises may apply to our prejudicial thoughts. We can't choose to erase them or get rid of them. We can't even stop thinking about them when things trigger them to come up. But if that's the case, what can we do? This is something we're going to keep talking about. See if we can look at prejudice as our own reaction to things going on inside ourselves, rather than something outside of our personal struggles, like society and other people's problems. This might seem like a strange idea at first. We all have our own psychological struggles, like a particular worry that bothers us that we don't usually tell anyone. Take a moment and think of a particular thought or worry that comes up for you a lot. Think about a thought or a worry that you experience quite often. Some common thoughts that bother people are things like, I'm fat, or no one cares about me, or I'm a failure. You don't need to share this thought, just think of it. Now when that thought is in your head, see if you can notice how you feel about it. Does it feel like if it were a physical object, you would want to throw it away? Or maybe you would like it even farther away, out into space. You probably notice it isn't something you like to have, and there is a reaction that feels like you want to push it away, to get rid of it. See if you can notice parallels between your reaction to your own difficult thoughts and how we've talked about people reacting towards people of color and women. Maybe there's a lot in common with how we feel about these thoughts and how we feel about people who seem to have less power in our society. Why do we think negatively of women and people of color? And why do we stigmatize our own psychological difficulties by deciding that they are bad and trying to push them away? Maybe it brings us a sense of security to do it. It may give us a sense of comfort by objectifying marginalized people, distinguishing them from ourselves. We don't want to notice that we might not be so different from people we label as being weaker or having more problems. Part of trying to appear as though we are not racist or sexist involves denial of benefits we receive in our society that others do not get. We think we are being safe if we don't admit that other people have a more difficult time in life. You are afraid if you show that you do benefit from certain structures that others do not. They might think you are a bad person. So it's all about self-defense. It's about advocating, I'm fine, I'm likable. Or, I think men and women have the same opportunities. Or, I prefer to be colorblind. So let's take a deeper look at some of the issues plaguing people of color and women in our society. So what is racism? Well, it's the belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Racism can take the form of beliefs, attitudes, actions, or institutional arrangements. The experience of racism can be overt, such as calling someone a hurtful name related to their ethnic background, or it can be more subtle, such as asking a person of color how they got their job, insinuating they didn't earn the position. Racism and the horrific behaviors and consequences of it are a global problem. To name a few examples, the Holocaust, apartheid, slavery, and the continued subjugation of ethnic minorities in the United States are all events rooted in racism. You might think as you hear that, sure, those were really awful events that most people recognize are morally wrong. Well, here's some other info you might not be aware of. People with quote-unquote white-sounding names are more likely to get a call back for job interviews compared to people with quote-unquote black-sounding names. Employers may also discriminate against ethnic minorities based on where that person lives, because it's commonplace to include your address on a resume. And speaking of addresses, there are also quite a few racially segregated neighborhoods. Ethnic minorities are at a greater risk of living in homes in which they are exposed to more toxic chemicals, such as lead-based paint. Also, because school districts are often zoned by neighborhood and funding for schools is based on property taxes, children living in low-income neighborhoods have less access to quality resources for education. While these are more system and societal issues, people of color also experience daily slights from other people. For example, a store clerk might follow around or watch closely non-white children in the store. Someone might ask a person where they are really from if they're not white, suggesting they are not citizens in their own country. The impact of such oppression on both micro and macro levels can lead to serious chronic health problems, such as hypertension or even cancer. It can also impact cognitive abilities, as more mental resources are spent protecting oneself from discrimination. So why does this continue? Well, it began with beliefs in white supremacy, but the ideas related to racism get passed down through generations with media, peers, and systems that reinforce a particular reality. Racism is really very difficult to address, because if you don't have the power, as whites do, or you're the only person of color in your place of employment or neighborhood, it's very difficult to feel as though you have a voice. To understand that feeling, think about a time when you felt just truly alone, and yet you were surrounded by other people. Sexism is also pretty complex. Sometimes sexism benefits women through the glorification of traditional roles. For example, a belief that all women are strong nurturers, leading to less acceptance in certain fields traditionally populated by men. Other times, sexism takes on a more hostile tone, such as sexual harassment or assault. Both of these types of sexism reinforce each other. The lowest paying jobs in terms of median weekly earnings are positions primarily held by women, such as cleaners, receptionists, childcare workers, and nurses. Further, women's pay has only increased compared to men from 62% in 1979 to 80% in 2008, which means for every dollar a man makes in his field, a woman tends to make 80 cents. And that's even the case when controlled for marital status and number of children. Over the years, that number really adds up in terms of lifetime earnings. And that statistic is primarily for white women, because the rates for women of color are substantially lower, between the 60s and 70%. One of the main issues of gender inequality involves objectification. Most men grow up being taught to be physically strong and achievement-oriented. However, women are raised to be nurturing, but also to be looked at and acted upon. Ever get mad at your female relatives for taking so long to get ready? It's not necessarily because of vanity. It might be because societal expectations involve women looking a certain way, and that's how their worth is determined, as partners and as people. Women are also expected to listen to sexist comments without retaliation. In fact, most women experience 1 to 2 sexist events per week. Professional women are often thought of as warm or competent, but not both. Imagine if being seen as a kind person also meant that people think you know less about your job. Or if being really good at your job meant that other people think of you as being a mean person. Being a woman can also be dangerous. 1 in 5 women report being sexually assaulted at some point in their life. And 98% of rapists don't spend a day in jail. To address these issues, some people think it's important to have adequate representation in Congress. But consider this. 32% of the population is comprised of white males. 32%. You know how many white males are in Congress? 75% in the House and 79% in the Senate. Women make up 50.8% of the population in the U.S., but guess what percentage make up our Congress? 17%. Further, nearly every minority group is underrepresented in Congress. There are 12.6 African Americans in the United States, represented by 7.9% in Congress. There are 16.3 Latinos in the United States, represented by 6% in the Congress. Without these voices and perspectives, how can real change occur? Why is this data so shocking? Because we think that people around us are happy all the time. They aren't taking lots of time to deconstruct societal narratives on what they're expected to be. When you walk by women on campus each day, you probably don't think about how 1 in 5 of them might be sexually assaulted at one point in their life. Do you think about how many more times a black person will be stopped by police? I'm wondering if our thoughts about women and people of color and stigma toward our own thoughts are getting in the way of who we want to be. Maybe sometimes we might feel that we're fake and not able to be ourselves. The real problem is not our own psychological difficulties, but our attempts to do something with those difficulties. What if I say that it is okay to have prejudicial thoughts? It might be quite natural that we perceive, categorize, and evaluate people. Now stay with me on this one. What do you do with the thoughts that bother you? We might fight them so that they'll go away. We might have to remind ourselves not to think of them. We might try to bury these thoughts at the bottom of our awareness. But our question is, did they really go away? Sometimes a thought pops up all of a sudden, or some event might trigger it. The alternative way is to be honest with ourselves and make room for what we think and feel. What does it mean to be honest with yourself? That is, to be willing to experience whatever you experience as it is without controlling, suppressing, and distracting yourself from it. I'm not saying you have to like it or tolerate it, as some of these thoughts you might have about people are pretty difficult to handle. That's not what I mean by being yourself or being honest with yourself. Take a moment and see if you can remember a thought or a feeling that really hurt you, that's really difficult for you. Something that's been in your way for a while. See if you can connect to your own pain from when someone attributed something really bad to you and you felt misunderstood. Something you felt like wasn't true of who you are, or really only a small portion of how you think about yourself. Notice any reactions that come up in your mind. Resistance, the sense of insecurity, vulnerability, weakness, shame, and maybe even loneliness. And what if I say it's okay? Being yourself might involve making room for these things in you. Given the information that you heard about racism and sexism, you also aren't the only one experiencing prejudicial thoughts. We all see everyone around us looking happy and together. See if you can experience here that you are not the only one that feels hurt sometimes. Can you imagine the people around you also having thoughts and feelings that they would like to go away? Can you imagine if some of the people in your life right now, your family, your friends, people you live with, people you go to school with, that they have experienced some form of prejudice and feelings that they want to push away too? See if you can imagine that, like you, they think if they let you see what was really going on with them, it might push you away. See if you can imagine that the world is full of people struggling with prejudice and emotions and trying to hide them so that they can be close to other people. Now picture yourself again in this room. Have you ever noticed that thoughts that bother you might not be what they seem? Things get really sticky when we believe that our thoughts are literally what they say they are, especially when thoughts about ourselves and others could be evaluative and judgmental. For example, think of the thought, deep down, there is really something wrong with most women. And we tend to think of our thoughts, of what they say, as the reality or as the criteria of reality. For example, we might believe that what our thoughts say we are, we actually are. We usually don't even notice that words like deep down there is something really wrong with most women are just thoughts. However, are you and other people really what your thoughts say you are? What if I say that thoughts are simply thoughts? Nothing more, nothing less. Rather than what they say they are. What if I say you aren't the thoughts you have about yourself? If you have thoughts about yourself that you're a failure, that doesn't necessarily equate to you actually being a failure. And you aren't the thoughts that you have about other people either. It might be difficult to understand this, so let's do a little exercise. So as I say, this exercise might be a little bit silly, but I'm going to say the word milk to you, and I want you to write down what comes to mind. So say the word milk out loud to yourself. I'll do it with you. Milk. Good. Write down everything that comes to mind when you said it. Maybe you thought, I have milk at home in the refrigerator. What else? Milk. Maybe you're picturing it. It's white. It's in a glass. Can you taste it? Can you feel what it's like to drink a glass of milk? It's cold. It's creamy. Coats your mouth. Okay, let's see here. What came across your mind were probably things about actual milk and your experience with it. All that happened is that we made a strange sound, milk, and lots of things show up. We noticed there probably isn't milk in the room with you, but it was in the room psychologically. You and I were seeing it, we were tasting it, we know what it feels like, and yet only the word was actually really here, unless you're enjoying a glass of milk right now during this module. Okay, now here's another exercise. You might feel embarrassed doing it, but I'm going to do it with you so we can all do it together. So what I'm going to ask for you to do is to say the word milk out loud, just over and over again as rapidly as possible, and then notice what happened. I'm going to do it with you, okay? Are you ready? Milk, 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 milk. Okay. So what came to mind while you kept repeating the word milk? Did you notice what happens to the psychological aspect of milk that we were talking about a few minutes ago? It ends up just being a sound, right? All of that stuff about the color and consistency just goes away. When you said it the first time, it was as if milk were actually here in the room. But all that really happened was that you just said that word. The first time you said it, it was psychologically meaningful, and it was almost solid. But when you said it again and again and again, you began to lose that meaning, and the words became just a sound. What I'm suggesting here is that what happens in this exercise may be applied to our personal thoughts about ourselves and other people. That negatively evaluated and prejudicial attitudes are just thoughts. And when you say things to yourself, in addition to any meaning behind those words, isn't it also true that these thoughts are just thoughts? Saying milk over and over again didn't make milk appear. It didn't change the reality. Thoughts are just smoke. There isn't anything solid in them. They're just words and sounds in our head. Sometimes we're so involved in our thoughts and feelings that we don't even notice their thoughts and feelings. They can actually seem like they are us. Notice how your emotions and thoughts are constantly changing. Sometimes you feel love and sometimes hate. Sometimes you feel calm and sometimes tense. Sometimes we feel happy and sometimes we feel sad. Even now, you're probably experiencing emotions like interest, boredom, or relaxation. Our thoughts are also constantly changing. Sometimes we think one thing, and sometimes in another, we might think the totally opposite thing. Sometimes it seems like our thoughts make little sense. Think of things you've liked and don't like any longer, or fears that you once had that are now resolved. The only thing you can count on with thoughts and emotions is that they will change. Though a wave of emotion comes, it will pass in time. And yet while these emotions come and go, notice that in some deep sense that you do not change. That must be that while you have emotions, you do not experience yourself to be just your emotions. And yet in some deep way, the you that knows what you think is not changing. I'm not asking you to believe this, just to notice it. And to notice even as you're noticing it, your thoughts continue. In the instant you notice your thoughts, you can also notice there's a part of you that's standing back and watching it all. A part of you that's not your thoughts. In some very important and deep way, you experience yourself as a constant. You are you through it all. So just notice the thoughts and emotions you're having now for a moment. And as you do notice, Also observe that there is a separate you that is noticing them. So, as a matter of experience and not of belief, you are not just your body, your emotions, your thoughts. These things are the content of your life, while you are the arena, the context, the space in which they unfold. As you see that, notice that the thoughts you have about others are not you anyway. See if you can take advantage of this connection to let go just a little bit. Secure in the knowledge that you have been you through it all, and that you need not have such an investment in all this psychological content as a measure of your life. Picture all the people you will interact with today, tomorrow, and in the coming weeks. Notice that each of these people are noticing you are a person as well. That you may have experienced prejudice, and that you may have felt at times that you were not enough. Notice if this feels uncomfortable. If you feel yourself moving away from noticing other people and putting up a wall between you. Notice that this is what we do all the time when someone might be able to see us, to really see you, with all your difficulties and struggles. Notice how afraid you are of letting go and letting other people truly see you. And notice the difficulties and struggles you're hiding from them are not you anyway. Now notice that the people in your life are all feeling afraid of you too. Notice that women in your life think they have to hide from you, that they are afraid you are noticing something negative about them. Noticing that Black, Asian, Latino, bi, and multiracial people in your life are also afraid you are noticing something negative about them. Notice that they are afraid of you knowing that at times they have felt or someone has made them feel like they are not enough. Take a minute to understand that, like you, each person is a person who is not his or her struggles, his or her thoughts, and his or her feelings. Notice that isn't how we normally experience the people around us. Notice that normally we experience people from what we make of their behavior, their appearances, and the things they say they mean. Notice that these things are not the people around us, and that, like you, the people around you are human beings in this moment, also noticing. We hope you've noticed something about the way you think about your prejudices and the prejudices of people around you. Now I'm going to ask you to look at what you've noticed in terms of how you are with other people and distinguish that from how you might like to be. Take out your scratch sheet of paper again. And first, I want you to write down how you've been being toward women and people of color in your life. There isn't a right answer, and nobody's going to see this. Just look for what you've noticed that you might not choose for yourself. How are you acting? You might notice that you've been more reluctant to be yourself around people of color in your life, or around certain women. Maybe you shift how you act, putting on a face you think they want instead of letting them be close to you. Now, write down the cost to you as a result. Has it kept meaningful friendships and relationships from developing further? Think of the people you miss out on getting to know as a result of your fear of letting them be close to you. How many people have you missed out on getting to know because of a stereotype or generalization you made about them? And last, write down how you are committed to being different. Think about what your values are and how you plan to be toward people in your life. How do you want to be different when you act and interact with people of color and with women in your life? Set some intentions for yourself. And with that in mind, that concludes this module. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this. You're all finished. Please make sure you email me at this email address, tayoung7@frontier.com, to move on to the next phase of study and to make sure that you're entered in the gift card drawing. Thanks so much, you all, and have a great day.